Hello. Road to GH will reveal exciting details on Tuesday, March 25th, 2025. First, at the PCPD interrogation room, the air was heavy with tension as Jason stood across from Valentine, his arms crossed and eyes narrowed. There was no need for small talk between the two men, no pretense of camaraderie. Jason's presence alone was a demand for truth. Valentine, although used to high-stakes encounters, felt a chill settle in his spine. Jason didn't offer protection, comfort, or even understanding, only a deal. A favor to be collected in the future, one he would not define, in exchange for every detail Valentine knew about Brennan. The offer was clear, and so was the warning that came with silence. Valentine gave a slight nod, and the interrogation began. Valentine leaned forward, his voice calm, but edged with something darker, fear, perhaps, or regret. He admitted that he had never seen Brennan falter until the previous night. For as long as he had known him, Brennan had been a man of singular focus, entirely devoted to the agenda of the WSB, committed to protecting secrets and eliminating threats. But something had changed. That night, Brennan had nearly killed him, and the reason wasn't state secrets or treason, it was Carly. A civilian. Brennan's obsession with her wasn't just irrational, it was dangerous. Valentine revealed how this sudden emotional vulnerability had exposed cracks in Brennan's carefully cultivated armor. Despite what others believed, Valentine suspected Brennan's recent demotion within the WSB was nothing more than an illusion, a clever cover story to mask his continued control behind the scenes. The idea that Brennan had stepped down was laughable to someone who had worked closely with him. Instead, Valentine believed Brennan was still orchestrating operations from the shadows, using his supposed fall from grace as a shield against scrutiny. His calculated demeanor and manipulation of internal politics made him even more dangerous than before. It wasn't just personal revenge Brennan sought, it was power, consolidated and unchallenged. When Anna and Jason reviewed Valentine's claims, they knew the implications were too significant to ignore. Both seasoned in navigating the complex world of espionage and corruption, they understood the necessity of allowing Valentine to speak fully and uninterrupted. Anna, particularly, was struck by how intricately Brennan's network had been woven. Valentine's cooperation was not a matter of convenience, it was critical. They needed to know who Brennan answered to, who protected him, and what deeper force had enabled him to act with such impunity. They braced themselves for truths that would inevitably alter the scope of their investigation. Valentine disclosed what he had long suspected but never dared to voice. Brennan was not at the top of the chain. Behind him loomed individuals far more sinister, power brokers who existed beyond the reach of international law and intelligence oversight. These were men and women who operated in complete anonymity, hidden in boardrooms, war rooms, and classified files that not even the WSB could access. Brennan was their enforcer, their shield, and their weapon. His actions were sanctioned not by morality or justice, but by agendas that thrived on chaos and control. The deeper Valentine went into his confession, the more visibly disturbed Anna became, and even Jason's stoic mask showed signs of strain. Among the most chilling revelations was Brennan's plan to eliminate anyone who threatened exposure, including Valentine himself. What Valentine had discovered was damning: covert operations involving biological weapons, political assassinations disguised as accidents, and secret deals that traded lives for influence. Brennan had crossed every ethical boundary and committed atrocities that shook even the most hardened agents. Valentine didn't justify his own past, but he made it clear that Brennan's crimes eclipsed anything he had ever done. His voice faltered only once, when he described the moment he realized he was never supposed to survive the mission he had been sent on. His survival had only accelerated Brennan's rage. When the confession ended, the room fell into a tense silence. Anna could hardly process the scale of what had been revealed, and Jason was already mentally connecting the dots. They had the testimony they needed, but more than that, they had a path forward. Valentine's words weren't just damning evidence against Brennan, they were a roadmap to unravel a network of corruption that extended beyond Port Charles, beyond the WSB. It was clear now. Brennan was only a piece of the puzzle. And thanks to Valentine, they finally had the leverage to bring the entire operation crashing down. Second, driven by a desperate need to protect Willow from falling further under the influence of someone as dangerous as Drew, Nina found herself consumed with dread. She feared that Michael, in his relentless pursuit of control, could be pushed to the edge, risking everything, including custody of his and Willow's child. But despite Nina's growing concern, Willow remained confident. She believed she could navigate any custody battle, that her role as a mother and her bond with her child would protect her from losing what mattered most. Yet Nina couldn't rely on confidence alone. Her instincts told her that something about Drew's newfound wealth was deeply wrong, and she needed proof, not just for herself, but to expose the man who had quietly manipulated his way into Willow's life. Using the spare key Willow had once trusted her with, Nina waited until the house was empty. Her heart pounded as she stepped into Drew's home, every movement deliberate and silent. The house seemed normal, orderly, a perfect mask for a man who had long since blurred the lines between business and betrayal. She moved quickly to the office, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on the safe hidden behind a cabinet. With quiet determination, she pried it open using the tools she had prepared, the clicks of the lock echoing like thunder in her ears. Inside, she found a collection of files, thick, confidential, and damning. As she flipped through them, her breath caught in her throat. These weren't just financial reports or private contracts. They were detailed records of illicit transactions, bribes, and corporate manipulation that had built Drew's empire on deceit. What shocked Nina most wasn't just the scope of Drew's illegal activities, but the cold precision with which he had orchestrated them. There were documents outlining offshore accounts, shell corporations, and agreements that pointed to blackmail and even the strategic destruction of competitors. One file suggested that Drew had removed more than just obstacles in business. He had deliberately ruined lives, possibly even taken them, to solidify his position. Each page painted a darker, more calculating version of the man Willow thought she could trust. Nina's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. She knew she couldn't take the documents without alerting Drew, but she could document everything. One by one, she photographed the contents of the safe, ensuring that every page, every signature, every damning detail was captured. As the shutter clicked over and over, a sense of vindication began to replace the fear. She finally had the evidence to reveal the truth, not only to Willow but to the entire community that had blindly accepted Drew as a reformed man. Leaving the house just as quietly as she entered, Nina knew she had crossed a line, but in her heart, it felt necessary. This wasn't just about protecting Willow anymore. It was about unmasking a man who had hidden behind a facade of redemption while continuing to commit unforgivable crimes. She had the truth in her hands now, and she would not let it go to waste. The question wasn't whether Drew would fall, but how far. And how many lives he would take down with him when he did. Third, at PCPD once again, Alexis arrived with a firm stride and guarded expression as she entered the interrogation area to meet with Valentine. He sat in silence, his face pale and worn from the weight of recent revelations, but his eyes held a trace of something deeper purpose. Though he fully understood that freedom was now beyond his reach, Valentine had one final request, something only Alexis could do. Despite the walls closing in around him and the legal certainty of his detainment, Valentine was no longer focused on escape. His mind was set on exposing Brennan, the man who had dragged him into a world of shadows and stripped away the last remnants of his control. Valentine didn't plead or beg. Instead, he spoke with quiet intensity, revealing that his life had spiraled into chaos ever since Brennan had re-entered it. The man wasn't just a manipulator or a superior agent, he was a master puppeteer, pulling strings that reached far beyond WSB walls. Behind Brennan's composed facade was a labyrinth of secrets, corruption, and crimes that stretched across countries and agencies. Valentine had seen enough to know that Brennan's reach was not only vast, but lethal. Though he was now caged by the law, Valentine refused to let Brennan continue unchecked. He knew he had to use what little power he had left, his knowledge and testimony, to bring Brennan down. Initially, Alexis hesitated. Her instinct as a former attorney and a mother warned her against becoming involved in something so volatile. Representing Valentine meant stepping into the line of fire, challenging the interests of men who thrived in the shadows. Brennan was not the kind of enemy one could cross without consequence. Alexis, aware of the legal and personal risks, shook her head and prepared to walk away. But as she reached the door, Valentine's words echoed behind her, not as a plea for help, but as a challenge to her sense of justice. He reminded her that truth, no matter how dangerous, demanded courage. Something shifted in Alexis in that moment. She paused, the weight of everything she had fought for, her career, her sobriety, her integrity, pressing down on her. Yet, beneath all that was her unrelenting desire to expose corruption and defend what was right. Brennan had endangered not only Valentine's life, but countless others, and if she walked away, she would be complicit in that silence. She turned back toward Valentine, her expression changed, no longer uncertain, but resolved. She told him she would take the case, not for him, but for the truth that demanded to be heard. Accepting the responsibility meant accepting the risks. Alexis knew she would be targeted, watched, perhaps even threatened by Brennan's allies or those who stood to lose everything if the truth came to light. But none of it deterred her. She began collecting files, reviewing the evidence Valentine had already shared, preparing herself to face a courtroom battle unlike any she had fought before. This case would not only test her legal skills, but her very resilience in the face of fear and manipulation. As she walked out of PCPD that day, Alexis didn't see herself as a savior or a martyr. She was simply a woman who had been through hell and back, now choosing to walk into the fire again, but this time, with her eyes wide open. Brennan may have built a fortress of secrets, but with Valentine's testimony and her determination, that fortress would soon begin to crack. She would stand at the front lines, no matter the cost, because truth, once uncovered, refused to be buried again. Finally, before the press conference began, Drew once again reminded Portia of the influence he held, not just within the hospital, but across Port Charles. His words were laced with power and veiled intentions, hinting at connections and favors owed, the type of authority he could wield if things didn't go his way. Yet, as their conversation drew to a close, he surprised her with a sudden shift in tone. He suggested she consider him a friend, someone who only wanted what was best for everyone. The contradiction between his assertive behavior and friendly facade left Portia wary, though she didn't speak her doubts aloud. Later, after Drew had left and the room fell silent, Portia's eyes fell upon a medical folder inadvertently left behind. Curiosity got the better of her as she flipped it open and realized she was looking at Drew's neurological records. The reports were alarming. Irregular brain activity, trauma markers, and signs of possible long-term cognitive impairment painted a picture of a man not entirely in control of his actions. As a doctor, she immediately grasped the implications. As a woman who had just been subtly threatened, she began to consider how such information could be used, not for treatment, but for something far more calculated. Meanwhile, Kai grew increasingly anxious about the upcoming press conference. His concerns about public perception and the weight of what would be announced left him visibly shaken. But Trina, always the calm anchor, reassured him with quiet strength. Her support gave him the confidence to move forward, unaware that behind the scenes, a different kind of plan was unfolding. Portia, now convinced that Drew's erratic behavior had a medical basis, contacted Curtis with urgency. Together, they examined the records, and for the first time, they saw clearly the neurological damage Drew had been hiding and how it might explain the extreme decisions he'd been making in recent weeks. What began as professional concern quickly turned into personal strategy. Portia and Curtis realized that Drew's condition could be the very key to holding him accountable. His actions, though rooted in illness, had caused harm, manipulated people, and crossed dangerous ethical lines. The time for caution had passed. With Drew's medical vulnerabilities exposed, Curtis and Portia began crafting a plan, one not of healing, but of reckoning. They knew they had to move carefully, using what they knew to turn the tide against a man who had once seemed untouchable. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about restoring balance. And then came Ava. Having observed Drew's increasing instability and manipulation, especially in the lives of Nina and Willow, she saw an opportunity of her own. Aligning herself with Portia and Curtis, Ava offered her full support in dismantling Drew's influence. But unlike the others, her reasons weren't purely medical or moral. Ava had long harbored her own ambitions regarding custody of her daughter, and with Sunny distracted and Drew now a potential legal liability, she recognized a powerful alliance forming. By backing Curtis and Portia, Ava could simultaneously destroy Drew's credibility and strengthen Nina's case in the looming custody battle. Together, the unlikely trio began coordinating their efforts. Portia brought the medical knowledge, Curtis provided the strategic planning, and Ava, with her social leverage and cunning instincts, began spreading whispers throughout Port Charles. Rumors about Drew's mental state began to circulate quietly, growing in strength and speculation. The foundation Drew had built, his reputation, his partnerships, even his claim to moral high ground, began to tremble. None of them struck the final blow. Not yet, but the net was closing in, and Drew, unaware of how much had been uncovered, stood at the center of a storm he couldn't yet see coming. This new alliance, built not on trust but on a shared objective, moved swiftly and quietly. What made it more dangerous was that each of them had their own reason to bring Drew down, professional, personal, or legal. The truth about his brain condition was only the beginning. Portia, Curtis, and Ava weren't just planning a takedown. They were orchestrating a fall so complete that Drew would lose everything, his power, his influence, and perhaps most importantly, his ability to manipulate those around him ever again.